tell you more about drone mapping and how to budget for it. We're also going to be joined today by Jason Tozzi. He's the technology coordinator for FAE, and you'll be able to ask him any burning questions you want to know. The general agenda that we're going to go through is just a couple quick slide intro on drone mapping. Then we're going to talk about specifically how to budget for your drone mapping program for 2018, for the year ahead. I'll talk a little bit about what onboarding looks like. I have a special limited time offer just for the live attendees today. And then we'll get to that Q&A. But if you do have any burning questions, feel free to enter them at any time. If you're not sure how to use the questions, you'll see on your screen a little arrow. So if you click that arrow, it'll open up this full bar, and then you can enter questions within that right here. So again, feel free to do that anytime. It can be for me or for Jason. So a little bit of background on drone mapping. We're seeing drones used in a variety of industries. In mining, from tracking progress, removing overburden, to the extraction process on leaching pads, to the actual final aggregate stockpiles to track inventory. In construction, a wide variety of applications. It can be used for volumetrics, for contour maps, for cut fill analysis, change detection over time. It can be useful to put the as-built and the as-planned together to make sure everything is going as intended. So wide variety there, as well as getting down to what the real cost per unit is on jobs for more profitable bidding. In oil and gas, it's also used on a lot of construction progress, project progress tracking. So that can be well pads, impoundment ponds, pipelines. All those are common applications, not just for the initial construction, but then also the QA and the regulatory tracking over time. Also used for right-of-way tracking to ensure that vegetation or equipment isn't encroaching. For landfills, you have kind of a set amount of airspace, a cell that you can fill, and you can't exceed that without having environmental damage and potential regulatory fines. So what drone mapping lets you do is optimize bringing your capacity right to the limit without exceeding it. And then for engineering and surveying, it's basically a way for them to gather the same data that they've been gathering, but to do it more cost effectively. Instead of having to have someone out, boots on the ground, marching over, in some cases, hundreds of acres to manually gather the data, now they can use a drone, gather thousands of data points for every probably 1 or 10 data points that we're getting, and you're looking at tracking something like 10 acres in about a minute. So just a much more rapid way to capture that data and then turn it back around. In terms of how the general drone mapping process works, you'll select your flight plan. You'll activate the drone and it will actually fly themselves. So you don't have to have your joystick out and be manually steering it left and right. The drone will just fly. It'll automatically adjust for things like wind and weather. Once the data is all captured, the data is automatically going to be processed into three-dimensional maps using our solution, and then you're going to be able to access and analyze your job site with a large number of different kind of layers and tools built on top of that, so you can get really detailed analytics. There's no, because there's no manual piloting, it's very scalable. It's a commercial grade product, highly reliable, and you're going to capture your data in minutes and usually get it back within hours. So when you think about how to budget, obviously now is a good time, right? Budgets aren't finalized yet. People are starting to looking back on 2017, what worked, what didn't, how things could be done more efficiently, and then look towards 2018 to think what money they need to set aside, and then also what they can kind of reshuffle to make the most efficient use of their spend. So when you think about what has to go into a drone program, we talk about the 4 propellers of a successful program. And this is going to be true really whether you do it with us, whether you use an alternative or whether you build it in-house. These are all the requirements that you're going to need to be successful. So in terms of data collection, you have to have pilots to capture the data. That means they have to have the commercial Part 107. You're either going to need to hire people that are already trained, or you're going to need to help educate them, have them take the tests, be prepared for safe operations, know what that operation looks like, have it built out. You'll need flight planning software to gather the data as we discussed. You'll need your drone, any accessories, sensors, and then whether you're using GCPs or PPK to sort of calibrate and optimize your accuracy, you'll need something in place for that. We have separate webinars and white papers kind of more dedicated to that technology, so if that's something you're curious about, let me know and I can give you more. Once that data is actually gathered, once it's collected, at that point it has to be processed. So you'll need hardware and software running together to kind of take all that raw data and turn it into something that's actually useful for you. And that's where the next stage, the data management and the analytics come in. So that's, you need somewhere to put the data, right? These are giant files, in some cases 5-10 gigabytes. So you don't want to just email it back and forth. You want to make sure your data is secure. So you need somewhere not only to store it, but somewhere that only the people you want to have access to it will. And you may have different access requirements for different groups. Maybe some people you want to have full master admin access, and others you only want to be able to see or do particular things. Maybe if you're working with a subcontractor or working with the end client, they should have different permissions than, let's say, the job manager or the project manager. You'll also ideally have some advanced analytics and reporting. That gets back to things we talked about, like the as built versus as planned, the change detection technology, cut fill, tracking, so a lot of things beyond just the actual 3D map itself. And you may want to do some post-processing. You may want to be able to share or edit in other tools, so you'll need some way to do that. And then you'll need the team in place for not just the pilots themselves, but people knowledgeable in FAA compliance, for registrations, data processing, quality assurance, tech support, and then a way to both maintain the technology and then upgrade the technology. Because a drone that is cutting edge today, unfortunately, a couple of years from now will probably be pretty obsolete, just because the pace of progress has been so rapid. So those are all sort of dedicated things you will need in place, again, whether you're using us or whether you're doing it internally. So when you think about the actual drone itself, there's a few ways to think about that cost. There's a really wide range. You can literally spend anything from a couple grand to about $50,000 per drone, depending on your exact requirements for a commercial UAV. The drone is, and it sounds weird to say this, but the drone is the simplest part of the whole process. It's really all about what happens once you get that data and what you can do with it to go from that raw data into useful insights to help you make better decisions and manage your job better. But aside from the drone itself, you're also going to need to either take on the risk or insurance if anything does go wrong, and also the replacement cost of the drone. If it's a $50,000 drone and it crashes, you're out $50,000, even if no one's injured. You also have to think about, well, do we want to have multiple drones on site in case there is a malfunction, so we're not just sitting on our hands while we're waiting for a repair. So strictly on the drone itself, those are some of the costs to consider. And then in terms of the data capture, we touched on FAA compliance. You're going to need to look at something like $50,000 to $30,000. That's going to include legal filings, training manuals, insurance whole liability, Part 107 certification, which is that commercial requirement we discussed, N number registration for the drones you're going to use, daily flight logs, maintenance manuals, maintenance logs, and then aviation lawyers for exact filings. So that is some background there. And then in terms of actually building out your own internal data infrastructure system, right, that's going to have a huge range depending how sophisticated you want it to be, how much you want it to scale, what kind of custom design you're doing. But big data means big support. If you're trying to cover dozens of different job sites, have the data easily accessible, easy to kind of work together and coordinate on, it's definitely not out of the question to spend anywhere from $60,000 to $300,000 on all that, and then staffing can be on top of that. You can easily spend $50,000 to $100,000 for a GIS professional, and you're going to need a wide range from people to actually analyze the data to kind of have the system playing nice and talking together. For hardware, as the UAV program scales your IT infrastructure may have to scale too. You have to have something powerful enough to process tens or even thousands of images in a timely manner. For data storage, there's security and sharing, like we discussed, access on sort of who should have permission to see what, and then just the challenge of being able to coordinate on these massive file sizes, multiple gigabytes, and maintain security while you're doing that. And then the actual final tools on that data, not just having the 3D, but being able to analyze it in useful ways to get the information you need, from ortho-rectified 2D photomosaics, 3D digital surface models, and goes back to the cut fill analysis and different tools to make sure that your project is on track and where you need it to be. The scariest part of some of this is if you're spending $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, that's before the program starts. So if you end up not being happy, if it doesn't perform the way you want it to, all that capital expense is out the door, and you're still kind of stuck. If there's tech support issues, if things aren't working the way you want them to, if different vendors are pointing fingers at each other, that's kind of your problem to figure it out. So one advantage of any managed solution is you have one neck to wring. It's in their interest to keep you happy, and there's no one to blame. It's a full integrated system where it all fits together. And with any SaaS model business, it's a subscription. You pay as you go. So if you stop being happy, you stop paying. There's not a massive upfront investment where you're committed. And that's really part of how the cost cutting comes in. When you compare it to some traditional alternatives, obviously people have been doing aerial surveys for a long time with planes or helicopters. It's relatively fast once you're actually out on the site, but there's a lot of expense because you're not just getting the data, you're paying to have a pilot come out, you're paying to have the vehicle come out, you're paying to have the jet fuel that's burned for it. All just so you can get a sensor in the air, but all those costs mean you're easily spending $10,000 to $20,000 for a flight on a large job site. And because of all that expense, those traditional surveying companies often want to wait until a few jobs have kind of come together in one region. So it can take weeks from when you want to book it till they actually come out for the traditional aerial survey. For manned survey, it's usually not as hard to get people out on the site, but because they're actually gathering it by hand, they're marching the job site by foot, potentially on steep cliffs, hazardous terrain. So on a larger job site, it can take weeks or even months to capture all the data. And that means by the time you finally get that data back, where it's all gathered, all processed, if the job site is a fast-moving job site and the data has changed, then the data you finally have back is no longer accurate. It's wrong. So then the next solution is a subscription drone service or doing it DIY internally. What that's going to do is now, when you get your data back, instead of being weeks or months old, it's hours old, and it's going to accurately reflect where your job site really is, giving you an opportunity to adjust if need be, to make changes, to share that with all the stakeholders, whether that's your internal team, your management, your customer, your subcontractors, and make sure that everybody is indeed on the same page. It can also help with things like speeding up approvals and not necessarily actually having to get people physically out on the site to see where progress is. So many customers that had been spending money on traditional aerial surveys or manned surveys, they're actually able to just take that exact same budget, not add a dime to it, in some cases even cut it down, and just redirect it to drone mapping, where they're spending the same or less money than they were, but now instead of getting updates once a year or once a quarter, they can get updates, in fact, once a month or even once a week. And there's a few advantages that kind of where it's useful to do a drone mapping solution not just as a replacement that happens to be maybe cheaper and more efficient, but by using a solution like this, you can defer a lot of those traditional mapping costs. You can avoid errors and downtime that you might have had to incur if you were building your own solution. You reduce the training and the development time. You can utilize those advanced analytics for near real-time collaboration. And again, because it's a subscription, there's no CapEx, and we're continually updating the software, rolling out new features, and rolling out new hardware updates, so you're never stuck with an obsolete drone. And that's just built into it, so there's no surprise costs. We do offer free expert consultations if you want to share a little bit more about your company, your exact applications, your exact projects. We can help you build out what the ROI of drone mapping would be for you, what you can expect, given your company's specific needs, and we would love to do that. So in terms of what the onboarding process looks like, and then after this we'll be jumping into the Q&A. You'll sit down with our head of client success, and she's going to go through with you setting out what your goals are as an organization, get you trained in how to achieve those goals and that technology, how to fly and operate the drone safely. We also have a VP of Aviation, John Little, with over 20 years experience with commercial flight and training, who's there to help you with any regulatory concerns, any training, and answer questions. We're going to make sure you pass your Part 107 and are able to interpret the insights properly from the software, and then finally integrate it into your standard operating procedures, and then scale that across your organization. If anything doesn't go in as planned, you have best-in-class support. Again, we have a full integrated system, so everything fits together, and it's on us if there's ever a surprise or you're not sure what to do, it's on us to get that fixed for you and operate the way you expect. We also have 24/7 resource center, so if you just want to study or research, or you have a question at some random hour, you can always dive into that, and that's freely accessible. And that covers every aspect of our system. We also, even after you're fully trained up, we'll still do a quarterly check-in. That's basically to make sure that you are aware of all the cool new features and technology that we've rolled out, and to give us a chance if you have any feature requests, something you wish we had, or an issue or anything like that, gives you a chance to share that with us, so we can get the product team working on that for you. So some of the advantages of working with a solution like Identified: we're going to help you win more bids, complete more jobs, be more efficient in your operations, so your profit margins are higher on your jobs through increased collaboration and visibility. Get all your stakeholders working together, and hopefully keep everyone on that team more satisfied, all the way from leadership up to the clients themselves. And then with that, an effort to bring down billing reconciliation delays, where you might have had to wait for the client to come out or wait for months to get the survey data back. Here we can turn that back around in hours and get that payment authorized more quickly. And then just avoid surprises, avoid rework, really being more responsive for what's going on the job site. So it's all about winning more bids, tracking increased profitability, QA, and client satisfaction and retention. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. If that is interesting to you, I'm going to include a link in the chat where you can get a demo. I'm going to follow up with a second and final link where if you tell us a little more about your needs and your company. Oops, sorry about that, that's wrong. There we go. You'll have a chance to win a free month of drone mapping. And with that, with no further ado, I want to get to the Q&A. So this is, if you missed it the first time, this is how to submit questions. There's a little arrow on the screen. You can click that and then open it up. You'll see audio and then a question bar below that. You can ask anything. It's fair game. You're going to be speaking with the esteemed Jason Tozzi, a construction technology coordinator at FAE. And you can ask him anything you want about his work or about drone mapping, and also, really anything is fair game if you have questions for me on the regulatory side, implementation side, or anything else. So anything you ever want to know about drone mapping, this is the perfect time to ask. And hopefully this has given you some just super high-level ideas on what you need for a drone mapping program, whether you're going with a managed integrated solution like ours, or going to build it out internally, what some of the costs are associated with that, and what are just some of the general boxes to check. So with that, I want to introduce, again, Jason. Thank you so much for coming out and joining us today, for being our valued customer, and for sharing your drone mapping journey with the community.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great. So Jason, could you just, for the audience, talk a little bit about how long you've been working in the industry, and maybe what some of the biggest changes you've seen in data capture over that time?
I've been in the industry a little over 25 years. I started out as a carpenter. Got involved with the technology end of things about 8 or 10 years ago. One of the biggest changes I've seen in just the past few years with the data capture is really the ability to do it. 5 or 10 years ago, you could pay a lot of money and do some aerial photogrammetry mapping, but that really wasn't practical.
It was like cost prohibitive?
Correct.
Yeah.
And then just the ability to analyze that data in a real-time fashion really wasn't available. Now with drone mapping, LiDAR, different solutions like that, the ability to get that snapshot in time is really the biggest change that I've seen.
And what, you don't have to talk about specific numbers, but why is it valuable? Why is it important to have that data turned around and available more quickly?
It just allows you to be able to compare your actual progress and production rates versus what you bid. And then that in turn allows you to project more accurately.
Got it.
And also gives you that real-time data of how you're doing and be able to make corrections.
So if there is a problem, you find out the day after, not the month after.
Correct. You can make a much quicker response.
Yeah. And I know nothing like this would ever happen at FAE, but have you ever talked to other coworkers or people in the industry where they have had some horror stories with that, where something was built 30 yards off, and it was only a month into it that it was noticed, and it just had to be kind of eaten as a cost at the end of the job? Yeah,
those stories are out there, definitely. Some of the things that you can do with this data, as far as taking a look at that ortho photograph and comparing it to the design mapping, you can make sure your stockpiles aren't going in a place where they'll need to be moved again. You can go ahead and look to plan and position laydown yards that are going to be in a spot that's the least intrusive or out of the way. So it's that kind of things really. It's sort of an added benefit to then when we first started looking at this as far as just a volumetric type of a tool. Those are some of the things that we were finding very useful.
Great. What got you, you talked about kind of the history of the technology and the evolution of it, but what got you specifically interested in drone mapping, and kind of what triggered you to pursue it at that specific time? And with it, what was it like kind of trying to build it out internally?
Initially, what got me involved was I happened to be the superintendent on the project, and my project manager happened to be our hobby guy. So when we were looking at, the company was looking at starting to get into drones, he was the guy that they tasked with, well, just getting, he flew model airplanes, so he was sort of the de facto drone guy. So as he, I just asked him, what are you doing? He started to explain to me. I was very skeptical. Didn't didn't think that it would work, this photo stitching to be able to get a model.
Because it was more like, if he's coming from a remote RC plane background, it's more like a toy than
Right.
a real professional tool.
Well, yes, and just the process of taking a two-dimensional picture and getting 3D data
Seems
out
kind
of
of
it.
too good to be true.
Yeah, it did.
It still does to me, and we do it every day. So.
But we started experimenting with it, and it was sort of it teased us. We could see the models, we could see the potential, but we just could not get it right. You know, so it led to some frustration, but we knew we had to pursue it. We knew we had to use it. We just needed to figure out how to get there. That's inevitably what led us here.
Yeah, perfect. You don't have to, again, talk about specific expenses, but what were some of the kind of general buckets of categories that were going to go into the program as you built it out? Just sort of some high-level categories.
Okay. Just doing some research, getting into it. Really, the unforeseen kind of stuff that you don't realize is if you're going to do this on a high level and you're going to make it part of your work plans, getting a computer that is able to process the amount of information that it does for multiple flights and sites to get you data in a reasonable time is extremely expensive. Many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's not something that you sort of think of when you're first looking at it. The photogrammetry software itself could be tens of thousands of dollars. Turns out that, you know, as we got our first drone, you know, that was actually really the cheapest thing about the whole, call it an experiment that we did, was the drone cost. The insurances, at that time, the 333 exemption procedures were all very, very expensive. And it was a very large commitment to go that route.
Okay, great. Thank you. For others that are thinking about, should they build this out internally? Should they go with a solution that's already kind of integrated and prepared? Would you have any advice for people in the audience?
Do what you're doing here. Do your homework. Listen to as many people as you can. You want to make sure that you know what you're getting into either way. Don't think it's as easy maybe as it sounds when you get into it. There's a lot more to it than just taking a drone out and flying it around. It's much more involved than that. So my recommendations is to make sure you do your homework and look at all the indirect costs involved with getting something that's actually going to work for you.
Can you talk just a little more on those indirect costs, just high level? What some of the biggest surprises were? Because you mentioned the drone itself was actually not as bad as you might have expected.
Correct. Yeah. The drone, you know, we went to the hobby shop. We knew what the drone costs, basically. Sure. But then when you get into the risk management end of things and you start looking at the insurances involved, you know, in 10,000 or better, depending on the level that you need on a particular project.
Sure.
When you start looking at the computer build out, you're not going to go to Best Buy and get something that's going to handle this amount of processing. Again, for a hobbyist or a something that you're going to do part-time, that may be a fine solution. But if it is something that you're going to integrate into the work plan, you're looking at tens and tens of thousands of dollars to get something with enough computer power to be able to process this information.
Got it. So it's really that stuff, the regulatory issues, the data storage, where things get expensive.
Correct.
Yeah, got it. Yeah. Okay. When you did start to figure out, okay, this maybe there's a lot of potential here, we're excited about this, but we don't actually want to do this completely internally. How did you hear about identified technologies, and what made you kind of decide, okay, that this is the way I want to go?
One of our project directors was contacted by somebody with identified. Shortly before I was appointed the construction technology coordinator, he forwarded that information on to me, and I went to one of the sites where you were flying, and basically went from there. Just started to investigate a little bit more. Started to see some of the results, some of the interface with the site IQ, the information that was provided, and compared that against some other things that were out there, and looking at the complete solution versus some of the other options, and internally building a system that's identified really was made the most sense to us, and it's, we don't regret that decision at all.
So we like to hear. What was that onboarding and training process like, from when you actually signed the contract and came aboard till you're actually flying your own flights internally?
It was a pretty straightforward process. We had a site available to us that we were working on, so we just scheduled with Identified to come to the site. They brought a drone out, took it out on site. They walked us through the steps of developing a flight plan, and showed us how how it was done. That was the boomerang models, but it was really straightforward. John Little actually came out and did the demo, showed us how to work it, passed the tablet around, so a couple people went and took off and flew, and it was a good experience. It's very simple, especially all of us that were involved in our drone enterprise were there, and we just were awestruck with how simple that was. And then I think the next morning we got the results from the flight, and looking at the data, we were just amazed by how easy it was.
In terms of integrating that technology into your standard operating procedures, can you maybe talk about what applications you use most, or what ways you use the reports you're getting back most frequently? FA?
Yeah, the most widely used thing on the site IQ is the volumetrics. It's very simple and straightforward. There are a lot of neat features with the volume tracking that we find very useful. We're tracking the same areas that we basically draw on the maps. We're comparing them week to week to week versus each flight, and we can compare them to finished ground, existing ground. We have that recorded data. So that's by far the most popular, very easy to use.
And is that useful for billing, or is that useful for knowing how far you still have left to go? They run together. It helps us realize the work that we've done, so that helps us with submitting accurate payment requests. Sure.
Also, we can take that information and look at our production rates. That helps with projections. Now we have actual data that we can compare. We know how much labor, and we can add that material in and come up with our actual costs.
And does that change the way that you bid future jobs?
It's starting to help us develop a library of information to be able to make more accurate bids moving forward. So that's really something that's starting. This is sort of new, but it's starting to help us collect that type of data, where before it just wasn't practical to go out and try to topo survey these large areas and get results in a timely manner. You can never get that snapshot in time like you can now.
I would imagine you have people like yourself who spent well over a decade doing this, that have just kind of like a gut sense of how long things will take, but that a library or an archive could be particularly useful for people coming in a little fresher, and they may not have that deep reservoir of experience to draw from. So I guess, do you think that that kind of archive has a value to kind of everyone across the organization, or is it particularly people coming in with less experience?
I think the value is there for everyone. It's definitely something that, as I think the catchphrase is the Internet of Things starts to become intertwined with the drone mapping, this type of data. We're going to be able to look back and really fine-tune how we bid particular things by having the ability to look back on historical data like you couldn't do before.
Yeah. In what area of the construction process has drone mapping had the biggest impact so far?
I think the biggest impact by far is to be able to get the snapshot of the project. You can basically, you know at 1 o'clock on a certain day, this is what the project looked like, and this is the 3D data, these are the volumes that you extracted, so that you can go back and actually say, you know, we had this amount of resources that were used between this point and that point. So you can really get a much more accurate depiction of what your actual costs were.
So inputs and outputs, it's saying, look, we threw, you know, five trucks and an excavator at this. It cost us this much to move this much earth.
Correct. Correct. So that really, looking at projections and things like that's a real key benefit of it.
Where do you see drone mapping technology going in the future? Maybe when you call out where you guess will be 5 or 10 years from now.
I think in the relatively near future, you're going to it's going to become more and more integral on these projects, to where it's more common to see them than to not see them. I think that as the technology increases, we're going to be getting closer to real-time data, and I think that the streamlining of that information, the breakdown of it, the ability to analyze it is going to be there. You know, just you're going to be able to extract the data, the information that you need with a couple clicks of a button. A lot of automation involved with that.
That's how we envision it too. It's like you have these job sites. It's not just that you're getting this drone data, but that drone data is then communicating and being shared with all these other sort of automated pieces that are then all using that update to then go set their action plan.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of the manual processes now are going to be replaced by a lot of these technologies. GPS tracking, things like that. Just everything's going to start to work together to get real-time data production rates.
And one thing I do want to make clear for our audience is, in no way is drone mapping now or really ever a replacement for people. What it is an augmentation. The same as, you know, a cordless drill. I know you were a carpenter. A cordless drill doesn't replace carpenters.
No.
Hopefully it helps you get more done with a little less effort and less time.
Right.
And that's really how we see drone mapping. In terms of for Faye specifically, when you talk about your core company values, I know you have 4 that you feel really define you as an organization, what makes you different, what you look for in your employees and your culture. Could you talk about how drone mapping fits into those 4?
Sure. Our first core value is work safely. Safety is our culture. Really, one of the very first things that got us into the drone mapping was we had some difficult terrain that we needed to get as-built data from. The drone basically eliminates the need to put any surveyor in any type of precarious situation as far as steep slopes or anything like that. It also reduces the exposure. you don't need to have a guy walking around, big equipment, heavy trucks, slips, trips, falls, anything like that. You're really reducing that exposure, so you're making it safer by basically eliminating the need to perform that type of work in the field.
They can send the drone out instead of going out by foot.
Yes. Our second core value is valuing people, taking care of employees, and they will take care of our clients and stakeholders. That's a big one. Along with helping reduce risks, we're also demonstrating our commitment to our employees that we're staying on top of the latest technologies, and we're providing them with exposure to it and training on it. And that's something that that I think a lot of our engineers and surveyors, they appreciate the fact that we're investing that time and energy into newer technologies and really valuing their feedback on how we could use it. It's very important.
I have some friends in a little more traditional industries that complain that it's really hard to, like what they're learning there is only useful there, and there's nothing that they can transfer, there's nothing kind of new. The people I've talked to really do appreciate the chance to kind of keep their skills sharp and stay up with the latest trends.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Another one of our core values would be acting with integrity. What the drone information allows us to do, it gives you the ability to be transparent. We can show highly detailed images of the work that we're performing, and that we can compare that with design plans. We can show that to the owners or the inspection teams, and that helps build the trust and confidence that the work is being performed, correctly. Things are getting done in the right place. It just opens that up. It also gives them a snapshot of the job, bird's eye view that you just don't get from walking around on the ground. And then the last one of our core values is providing solutions. And there's been several instances where we've had issues with grades or E&S controls, maybe.
Sure.
We've been able to take up-to-date information from our drone flights and very detailed maps, and they've allowed us not only to identify problem areas, but also to help provide solutions. And what we can do with the information, we can provide accurate information. We can show where the areas are, and then we can also provide solutions that make sense to everybody, and we can give good estimates of what it'll cost to perform that work because we have the accurate data that we're working off of.
My last question is for the people out there that are thinking about using identified technologies. Would you have any final advice for them?
Advice is just research as much as you can. If you determine that a fully managed solution is what you're looking for, I don't have any reservations in recommending identified tech. It's been a great experience. Their client success team is really super. Never left me hanging, never left me waiting. Always getting answers or helped with any questions that we've had. Been really second to none. Honestly, if Identify would tell me that I was their only customer, I would believe them, because that's really honestly how well we're treated. Appreciate that.
That's what we go for, but it's really nice to actually hear that back, Jason. So, I know you're a busy man, and I deeply appreciate you spending your time this afternoon with us to talk a little bit about your experience with Identified, share some of your hard-earned wisdom and experience with our audience, and thanks for all you and the whole team at FAE do. We really value you.
My pleasure.
So everyone listening, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to go to identifiedtech.com. You can sign up for a demo or send any questions that we didn't get to today. And otherwise, I want to wish everyone a wonderful week ahead. And thank you again. Take care.